I'm not a destroyer of companies. I'm a liberator of them. The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for a lack of a better word, is good. Greed is right. Greed works. Greed clarifies, cuts through, and captures the essence of the evolutionary spirit. You know what that is, Joey?
Wall Street?
That is good old Michael Douglas as Gordon Gekko in Wall Street. Kudos, my friend. Oliver Stone's a classic film right there from the 80s, which I think we'll be getting into here shortly. Welcome to the Average Joe's Movie Club Cast. This is Justin.
And I'm Joey.
And tonight, our movie club pick is director Clint Eastwood's 2011 film, J. Edgar. And the challenge movie for this week is Toshiya Fujida's 1973 film, Lady Snowblood. And if you want to be a part of the movie club, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Just a heads up, we do discuss our full thoughts on films, so if you've not seen one, just skip forward a little bit to avoid any spoilers. So, Joey, how's life?
I mean, life's been pretty good, man. Just I'm on vacation right now, so I've been watching a lot of movies, playing some video games, just enjoying not going to work.
Okay, how long do you have off? Like a whole week?
Yeah, actually, my 7 days for vacation, and then I start next week actually on Sunday being off, so I actually have 8 days off.
Oh, sweet. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm kind of the opposite of that. So school for my kids started this week, so I'm having to get up at like 6:15, 6:30 in the morning to go drop them off at school. And then they're involved with all these activities. We got Nolan's and my oldest son's in fall ball, which is pretty good. He has a pretty good coach. Parks him three days a week on that. They just started gymnastics, which my middle son, he's like this beanpole kid that loves to climb all over everything, so he's having a blast in gymnastics. And then we just had our Cub Scout kickoff tonight. So busy. And I'm turning 34 coming up on Sunday, the August 25th, whatever day that is. So, yeah, crazy time of year for me.
Well, happy early birthday.
Thanks, sir.
And I'm gonna have to get down there and one of these years and celebrate that, man. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, and it would be something good.
Shoot, I'm trying to think. I know we kind of hung out a couple years ago during like bowl season, like whenever you had an apartment down in Charleston. And shoot, the plan was to kind of like live together. I think you were going to try to go back to school and just didn't work out. So,
well, you're talking about when I lived in Charleston a few years ago. That was you're talking about when I was living with my girlfriend at the time.
Well, the plan, like I was abroad, and like you were looking at like getting living at a university place. And we were thinking about like all moving in together, but it just kind of, the plan fell through, I think, when you guys broke up.
Yeah. So yeah, I was a few years ago. Put that in perspective. That was 13 years ago now.
Yeah, time flies,
doesn't it though?
Yeah, shoot. I think I mentioned on the show last week. I just had my 11th wedding anniversary, so that really shows you kind of getting old, but yeah, I guess with age comes experience. All right, so moving right along, what are some of the highlights from your movie watching, other than our main feature movies this week?
I finished out the Lone Wolf and Cub series. So that would have been Lone Wolf and Cub, Baby Card in the Land of Demons, or Lone Wolf and Cub, White Heaven in Hell. So the fifth one, which was Baby Card in the Land of Demons, went back to the original director, and it was definitely a step up from the fourth movie. And then White Heaven in Hell, which was the sixth one, was very interesting. It took a very interesting turn, and they introduced some new facets to the franchise that had not been introduced before. It also, so they introduced, I don't want to say zombies, but zombies. Um, 'Cause I don't want to say that they were zombies because they were living, but they were definitely raised from the dead, but they had been buried alive but weren't dead. It was weird, and then it had a lot of a James Bond feel because there was a lot of dudes skiing and fighting on skis. It was weird, and then the big build that you had for six movies, the bad guy didn't die, and it was definitely set up to have another movie that they just never made. So I also watched another movie that I had been looking forward to for a long time, which was Lone Wolf.
And how long are these Lone Wolf and Cub movies?
They're all about like an hour and a half or so a piece.
Okay, and how many of them are there?
There are six, plus in the extra credits on the box set is Shogun Assassin, which is the first two spliced together and dubbed over for American release. Which, of course, Shogun Assassin is referenced a lot in Wu-Tang's music and also is referenced in Kill Bill 2. Mm-hmm. So, which is how I was first turned on to it.
And so I know you and your roommate are really into a lot of these samurai flicks. So it was like the whole Zatoichi thing on the horizon for you?
Yes, because he bought the box set.
Okay.
During the most recent Criterion sale, so that is on the horizon. Eventually, and oddly enough, I do. We'll probably be talking. One of my talking points later on is to mention Zatoichi during something, so that's a thing.
Okay.
Yeah, and Lone Wolf and Cub also, was definitely some inspiration for Mr. Tarantino. So.
Okay. So what would you say your high point of this whole like samurai exploration has been?
I mean, that's really hard. I mean, probably honestly the best movie was Seven Samurai, which I watched last year. It was just one of the best movies of all time. Yeah. But more of these style samurai movies is probably Snowblood. I think Snowblood is really good. And like obviously, as it's a humongous influence on Kill Bill, which is my favorite movie, like that probably is not very shocking. Gotcha. But the Lone Wolf and Cub series is really good, and anybody who likes samurai movies, and they do have some exploitation feels to them as well. It's 7 movies for $100, or if you hit the Criterion sale, it's 7 movies for $50. That's really good. Like good pricing for the amount of movies, it's definitely worth it. And then another one that I watched to keep up with the same name style theme is Lone Wolf McQuade, which has nothing to do with those. It's from the 80s, starring Chuck Norris, going against David Carradine. So it's a very, very 80s. I think in my review I said something as like one of the most 80s movies ever. And you see at one point Chuck Norris gets buried in his Dodge Ram Charger by David Carradine, and he hits like a switch in it, and it's like a supercharger, and he just drives out of the grave. And it was just glorious. And then it builds up to them fighting each other, and the fight scene at the end doesn't disappoint because it's those two guys with martial arts. So it's pretty good. I watched some really trashy movies. I'm not going to talk about those. They were really bad. Other than I watched a movie called Christmas Twister, which on Letterboxd it's listed as F6 Twister because I guess around the rest of the world you don't necessarily celebrate Christmas. But on the title screen they misspelled the word Christmas. It was Chris Tam's Christmas, and that was pretty hilarious. But the movie itself was pretty bad. So that's pretty much what I've been watching.
Oh, very cool. All right, let me get to some of my highlights. Watched a bunch of movies, but just talk about a few. One of the more recent ones I watched, I saw this slocky kind of superhero horror combination, The Toxic Avenger. This is brought to you by Troma Studios or Entertainment, which I hadn't seen any of their stuff before. I follow another show where they recommend a lot of these kinds of movies, and geez, The Toxic Avenger. Like going into it, I thought it was going to be a lot more mainstream because I actually remember seeing a NES game for The Toxic Avenger back in the day. And geez, how do I even start with this movie? So it's like super 80s. Like it starts off like going into a gym, and you see all these people working out and all this spandex, getting all into their, working out and stuff, and like the antagonists in the movie are these jerk teenagers, and they're just like totally psychotic. Like they start off by like driving around playing this game. It's like, oh, we're gonna have to like run down like a minority person or a child or something, and they end up like hitting this kid on a bike and then like backing up and smashing his head. And that's like, for being like this schlocky kind of horror movie, I thought the special effects were like really good. Like the point where like the guy actually does turn into the Toxic Avenger, because he's this really, really dopey guy, and he ends up falling in like this vat of like toxic waste and like transforming. And actually the transformation, it was almost like as good as the American Werewolf in London transformation, which I actually just saw for the first time last year or earlier this year, I forget. But yeah, so there was actually a lot of money behind this kind of a silly horror / superhero movie, like I had mentioned. Yeah, it really kind of plays up the horror aspect, because you kind of see this guy, like after he transforms, like he has this real deep voice, and he's no longer this putsy guy, and he's a serious crime fighter, but like they kind of shoot it in a way where like he's like this mysterious creature. So I had a lot of fun with this. It was I would surprisingly probably give it like 4 stars. I thought it was an excellent time. I mean, it's a silly good time, but I mean, definitely entertaining. On Saturday night, so have you ever seen a John Waters film, Joey?
I can't say that I have. I mean, maybe, and just don't know it. I can't say that I'm familiar with that name off the top of my head.
Okay, he's a pretty notorious filmmaker. You might have heard of a movie, one of his most cringy movies of all time, Pink Flamingos. But essentially, he came out with these movies, I think, probably in the 70s, all starring this drag queen named Divine. And so I'd seen Pink Flamingos, and John Waters, he's something else. I mean, it's like basically like trash cinema. Like he comes up like with the most putrid things imaginable to see, but it's so crazy, it's funny, and you almost like feel nauseated kind of watching it. And so Female Trouble is on the Criterion Collection, and it was on the Criterion Channel, and I was needing something kind of short to watch after I had watched this like 2.5 hour like German World War II movie called Mephisto, which is on Roger Ebert's list. So I checked that out finally, but I want to actually get to Female Trouble because, geez, how do I even what do you see in a John Waters film? Like a lot of the highlights for me for John Waters, like kind of comes up in like from what you see in Pink Flamingos. Like for instance, the end of Pink Flamingos ends with like this character just walking behind a dog and all of a sudden eating dog shit, and you're like, it's just so nauseating to look at. And there's so much crazy stuff in these movies, and I'm almost like blanking on this one in particular. But okay, so you have this like big guy who is the Divine character, and they go on and on about how like glamorous she is, but it's kind of this whole like contrast juxtaposition thing, because she's actually this hideous looking drag queen, and yeah, she's just flopping around. I mean, just to kind of give you a taste of what this. I mean, these movies are all like rated NC-17, and like early on in the movie, like she just like decides she's gonna have sex with this guy. So she gets out of this car and it's like, "Hey, big boy, you want to have sex?" And it's actually like the male version of her. So it's like the same actor having sex with themselves, like one as a drag queen, one as this dude on the side of the road. And I mean, that just gives you a little taste of how wacky this stuff is. And yeah, this is, I mean, you might have heard of like films called like Salo, that's like kind of showing this kind of disgusting stuff and like the most like most depraved things possible. And this is like the goofy version of that. So it's very strange to see stuff like this in this acclaimed film collection, but it's there, and at times it's interesting, amusing, but also nauseating. So one of these days we'll have to chalk out some John Waters. While I was on vacation in the hotel room, I also checked out something else on the Criterion Channel. I had been meaning to watch A Night to Remember for the longest time, and this is actually like the original like acclaimed Titanic movie. And so this one, it's not nearly as long as James Cameron's movie, but essentially this, I mean, you watch this and it's like basically a blueprint for James Cameron's Titanic movie. There's like so many of like the plot beats like throughout. For instance, like just like how the iceberg hits the boat and like people are on deck like playing with the ice, and like the lower class citizens get like locked down in the depth or like within the ship and they won't like let them out. And I mean it's a historical film, so of course it's going to cover like the timeline of these things, but at the same time it felt so much like the James Cameron version. Just kind of a different take on it. I mean, obviously it doesn't have Kate and Leo in it. Yeah, Night to Remember, definitely worth checking out if you're into the whole Titanic story and want to see like a different version compared to the James Cameron's, a little shorter. I don't remember James Cameron's having as much focus on like the stupidity that was going on like around the ship. Like there's a part that depicts how like there's a ship like just several like just miles away, but like they had their like radio comm stuff like off and they were just kind of sleeping, so they had no idea that the Titanic was sinking and they could have helped them. So yeah, that was a really good flick. I definitely recommend checking that out. I think that's like spine number 7 in the Criterion Collection. So I got to the movie theater this past weekend to take my kids to go see Angry Birds 2. And I didn't have any expectations, and it far underwent any expectations. I hated this movie. So for me, like, I watched The Simpsons and Family Guy. And I always enjoyed The Simpsons more because it seemed like it kind of had like... It was going for like this one like kind of theme throughout the whole show, and it was funny, and it was like kind of hammering on that. Where Family Guy is just so random. Like I always had trouble getting into that show, and it kind of seemed like Angry Birds 2 was kind of aiming at that same kind of random humor, where it would just kind of go off and like show these things and be like, "That's funny, right?" And it totally wasn't funny. It was just so random. And then it actually had a great soundtrack. You'd hear all these like fantastic songs, but it was really just to distract you from the fact that you're watching this awful movie. And I actually enjoyed the first one, decent. I mean, it was pretty funny. It had some interesting character stuff with him actually having like anger issues, and then they're actually kind of playing into the video game at the end, or the mobile game. But actually, I wouldn't have brought this up unless there's actually a highlight here, and it's the fact that there was this like 5-minute short film like ahead of Angry Birds called Hair Love, which was actually a really, really good short. It's about this African American family, and it kind of had some like My Neighbor Totoro vibes to it. I don't want to spoil it too much. I mean, it's only a 5-minute short, but essentially it's about like this relationship with a daughter and her father, and like her mom's not in the picture, and like she's trying to like style her hair this certain way, and like the animation is like this kind of scratchy look to it, so like it really like bodes well for like this hair being depicted as like this force of nature that's gonna like if you gotta kind of wrestle it to get it in place kind of deal. And so that was a really cute short, and they actually used technology in a fun way to where like the girl actually had this like tablet that had like all these different videos of her mom styling her hair in different ways. And so the objective was for her and her dad to like do it the same way, and they were not able to do it as easily as mom was. So that was a really cute short that I enjoyed a lot more than Angry Birds. And I didn't have to, and I only sat there and watched that for 5 minutes, and Angry Birds went on for a prolonged like, I think it was at least an hour and 40. I don't know why, but do not recommend paying money to see Angry Birds 2. Save yourself from that. Yeah, I gave that bad boy easily 1 star on Letterboxd. Was not very disappointed with that. I guess I was disappointed with spending money to see it, $30 or whatever at the theater. It's not worth my time there. I finally got around to seeing a movie. Like several years ago, I had turned Woody Allen's Manhattan on Netflix, and I just kind of watched the first few minutes of it. And I think I was watching with my girlfriend at the time, and she just wasn't in in the mood for this. Like, we had watched some like later Woody Allen movies that we've enjoyed together, like Match Point, and just for some reason she wasn't digging it, so we just turned it off, and I had never gotten back to it. And I always heard this was like one of his like most famous films. It came like right after Annie Hall, and I had wrote in my Letterboxd review, it's like, if you want to know like a Woody Allen film, I mean, it's so formulaic. You have like this neurotic guy talking about like life and philosophy, and there's all these like fickle relationships going on, and it's all like within the backdrop of like this gorgeously shot city, which is obviously New York in this case. You'll see basically the same kind of thing if you watch one of his later movies, Midnight in Paris, starring Owen Wilson, is kind of his character in that. And so, yeah, I just wanted to mention it. I really enjoy, when I'm in the right mood, I really enjoy Woody Allen movies. I mean, you can just kind of sit down and cozy up to in a blanket and just hear this guy just have all this strange neurotic dialogue, and it's pretty amusing. And so it's kind of interesting to see in some of his other films, like he did a movie called Crimes and Misdemeanors, which has this like strange neurotic character, but it's also like woven into this more serious like murder drama thing. So he had some interesting takes on it, but I would say Manhattan is like the quintessential like what Woody Allen does. And so if you ever want to try to get into his movies, I would start with that one and see what you think. Have you seen any of his work?
I've seen Match Point. Several years ago now. Back when I was watching, like I watched Match Point and like Scoop, which I don't think is his work, but it was I was watching like everything that had Scarlett Johansson in it. So I definitely enjoyed that. I think I've got Annie Hall on my Netflix queue, or at least because it was on there.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was Netflix. So it's definitely one I want to see. I know that one's super famous. So he's one I'm intrigued to watch.
And yeah, Annie Hall was the first movie I ever watched from him, and it's still, I think, my favorite. Just how much that gets into like what relationships are, and there's a lot of like third wall breaking in that one. And that actually won Best Picture for him. I need to watch some of his earlier stuff. I think he has some slapstick movies that came a little earlier on that I'm interested in seeing, because he did start out as a comedian before he became, this stylistic filmmaker. And speaking of stylistic filmmakers, my last movie I wanted to talk about was I finally got the urge to see Steve McQueen's first film, Hunger. Now, the reason I preface that is any Steve McQueen film is gonna be like it's gonna be a gut punch. The director is no holds barred in terms of like giving you the grimmest picture of humanity possible. I mean, just look at like 12 Years a Slave or Shame. Those are the movies I've seen, and now I've seen Hunger. And the really interesting thing about McQueen is the fact that he contrasts this real grisly look at humanity with like this beautiful cinematography, especially like 12 Years a Slave. You'll see that. So Hunger is about the Irish hunger strike in this prison because this leader of the IRA, I guess he got his political status removed from Britain, and so he was imprisoned, and in protest they were basically like living or making things even worse for themselves in the prison. Like one of my favorite shots, it shows you this picture of a wall, and there's this really beautiful like design of like swirls on it, and it zooms up and you realize it's actually someone like took feces and was rubbing it on the wall and making it this beautiful pattern. So there you have like this disgusting like element in a film, but it's done in like this beautiful way. So it's kind of an interesting way to depict that kind of thing. Now, the thing that I didn't like as much about Hunger is just the historical context. It made it a little more difficult to get into this because, you really don't get a solid picture of who this guy is and, like, what he means to the IRA. It's really more just about, like, his view on life and why it's necessary to do it. Like you'll see in a lot of Steve McQueen films, there's these long extended shot sequences of things going on, and in this case, there's a famous shot of just him talking to this priest for like I don't even know how long it goes on. It's at least like 10, maybe more minutes, but it's like halfway through, you're like, man, they are still talking, and it just feels so natural. So it's really props to the actors for being able to carry on a conversation that long within a film and it being all one take and it being, feeling so natural. So Hunger was really good, but definitely not my favorite Steve McQueen. I would say this is a little bit down just because of the historical context makes it not as relatable as I've studied all kinds of like Civil War history and familiar with slavery in America. So 12 Years a Slave was very relatable. And then not personally me like living in that time period, but I understand the context of the story. And then Shame is all about sex addiction, and we're all human, so we know what that's all about. Not that level of it, obviously. I'm talking like all these movies being like relatable, but it's very like the darkest, grisliest side of that. But you can there's topics you can kind of keep wrap your arms around. All right. So moving on, we got a little bit of listener feedback. I had mentioned last week that our buddy Ben, he had sent us several questions. So we're just kind of chipping away at them each show. And this week we're going to tackle Ben's question about the 80s. He was going to ask us what our favorite 80s films were. And so Joey and I compiled a top 3 list, which is more than 3 movies, as you'll kind of see how this plays out. I guess I'll start. So my number 3 picked, I wanted to pick an 80s action movie. And so many to choose from. The next couple ones I'm going to say are all like masterpieces in my mind. Die Hard, I could have said Aliens, which is fantastic. But I'm going to go with Arnold Schwarzenegger's The Predator. Just such an incredible like display of like 80s machoism. And fantastic. John McTiernan, between this and Die Hard, like the dude was just nailing it in the 80s in terms of action. This is like considered like one of the most iconic action movies of all time. And it was such a gamble, like having it be this like alien creature that saw in infrared. So like a lot of that aspect, it was kind of a risk-taking film, but it totally works. And like that end scene of Arnie like camouflaging himself in the mud and like doing almost like this Home Alone style, like out in the woods, like traps and stuff for the Predator, and it's taken completely seriously and fantastic action. Bill Duke, I rewatched the film earlier this year, and his role is so much more poignant in the movie than I had ever remembered, and so Predator is my first choice of incredible 80s movies. What direction are you going in, Joey?
Okay. Before we start that, I'm ago, we were talking about Woody Allen, and I said I had seen Match Point, and then I also said I had watched Scoop, but that wasn't a Woody Allen movie. It's actually, in fact, a Woody Allen movie. I wanted to buy that. So, but back to the '80s films. So for the action movies, there was a bunch I could have mentioned. I completely blanked on Predator. That's a good pick. So I'm in a completely little bit different direction. My mentions. I was thinking about doing Roadhouse. I love that movie. Just grew up watching that all the time. And also, you're talking about machoism. There's a guy that just brings to my mind for late '80s, and that's Jean-Claude Van Damme, with Kickboxer and Bloodsport. I love both of those movies a lot. I watched those both a lot as a kid. But the quintessential '80s action film, also my favorite Christmas movie, Die Hard. Like that is the '80s action film. I mean, it's what you think of. Like when I think of Bruce Willis, even to this day, he's John McClane. If I see someone's last name's McClane, it's John McClane. That's what it is. I know everyone that's younger, they think of Alan Rickman as Snape. No,
Sure.
no, he's Hans Gruber and the Sheriff of Nottingham. That's a '90s movie that
Is that Men in Tights?
no, well, Prince of Thieves.
Okay.
Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Those are the two movies I know him from as a child. So, I mean, that's just, I mean, you just ho ho ho. Now I have a machine gun. Yippee ki yay. Yeah, I'm trying to keep it clean. We won't say the rest of that very famous line.
If it wasn't for the fact that him falling off the Nakatomi building looks a little cheesy, it might be a perfect movie. That's the only slight glimmer of imperfection.
Okay. But in the time when we were growing up watching that wasn't cheesy. It only looks cheesy now because everything looks so much better.
All right.
At least in my opinion. And I don't even think it looks that cheesy. I mean, when you think about everything else that happens in that movie, like you have a guy, like you then have him use a fire hydrant hose to swing. You have a guy hung by a chain who lives. Like, I mean, all of that stuff, like, is so crazy. But I mean, it's action movie. So I mean, that movie is just great. So that's quintessential '80s action movie.
Absolutely. All right, so number 2, I'm going to go with great films, and wow, this is a spectrum. I mean, I could have gone with like Akira Kurosawa's Ran, which I didn't watch back then, but I watched recently, and it's my favorite Kurosawa movie. Empire Strikes Back is phenomenal. The Shining, my favorite horror movie / like an amazing Stanley Kubrick movie. Raiders of the Lost Ark, like define my childhood, but I'll go in terms of a great movie. Won the Oscar that year, Amadeus, the historical biopic of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, and it just brings chills to my thinking of this film. I really, really love movies that show an artist in their element creating, and this movie has the quintessential scene of that taking place, where you have his rival in the movie, and he's on his deathbed, composing his own funeral march, and his rival is trying to keep up with him as he's composing this music for him as they're singing it together, and the back and forth. It is just one of the most remarkable pieces of cinema I've ever seen, and just an amazing film. Amadeus, you gotta see it. You seen that one?
I have not seen that one actually.
Okay.
The one we were talking about being, because completely by accident, we did, when I did my 1000 movie, it was in the 50s. My 1100th movie was in the 60s, and my 1200th movie was in the 70s. So now my 1300th movie has to be in the 80s. My 1400th movie will have to be in the 90s. So that was one that was tossed around as being my 1300th movie, because I have not seen it.
Okay.
So, and oddly enough, another movie you've mentioned in this conversation is one that is being tossed around for my 1300 because of what my 1200th movie was.
Oh goodness, you're getting very down in the weeds on how you're picking your movies and where.
Yeah, it's I don't want to say addiction because that has such a negative connotation to it, but I did Alien at 1200, and I had not seen any of the franchise other than Prometheus and Aliens or AVP before.
Hmm.
So I mean, to me, it only makes sense to see Aliens at 1300. Other than that's a long break in between movies.
Don't do
So
it. Don't do that to yourself. You gotta watch Aliens now.
I can't. I mean, I
Get
feel
away
you.
from her, you bitch! Now.
All right. So we're doing best movie or favorite movie from the 80s.
Yeah, just however, whatever direction. These are just kind of the framework I went with.
All right. So there were a couple that even while we were just talking about it, I had to kind of add this because I had forgotten about it. So there was the Terminator.
Sure.
Just yeah, and then the Thing, which I actually
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see the Thing until like 2 years ago, and I
Uh,
loved it. It was great. And how can you talk about the 80s without Empire? I mean, I think especially for both of us and most people around our age, that's their childhood. That's especially if you're into quote nerd fantasy. Like I'm going to pick Batman. From 1989. That was the first movie I ever owned. I had it on VHS. It had my mom's writing in cursive. It was the first word in cursive I could ever read when I was 5 years old, before I could even read in print. I could read my name in cursive written on that VHS cassette. I remember taking it to like daycare. Um, like I probably shouldn't have been watching that version of Batman at 5 years old, but 6 years old. But I mean, I've seen that movie so so many times, and like I came across the 20th anniversary digipack of it not that long ago at a Second Charles. It was still brand new. Like I couldn't pass it up. And of course, like 10 minutes after I bought it, I got the notification from Zavi that there's a 30th anniversary steelbook. Um, but
mhm.
so that's just, I mean, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. So it's just Batman. It's so good.
Been a long time since I've seen it, but I had a VHS copy as a kid. Watched it many a times. So yeah, definitely relate with you there. I remember being a kid and when the sequel came out, Batman Returns, and I was into like the toys at McDonald's. I think I saw it in the theater, and much different than the first one. But yeah, the first it's a great movie there. All right, and so my last category is basically movies that define the '80s for me, and I mean a lot of I had to put Ghostbusters in here somewhere. Ghostbusters is near and dear to me. The Breakfast Club definitely qualifies as that quintessential '80s, but for me in my childhood, the Goonies is where it's at for me. I saw that so many times as a kid growing up, and I still watch it. It's so cheesy, but like the whole spirit of it being like going on this treasure hunt against pirates and these characters, and it like I said, it's cheesy, especially watching as an adult. You're down here, we're up there, and it's goofy, but the Goonies, can't go wrong with me.
All right, so I got a couple. So Lost Boys, Stand by Me, Back to the Future 2, all kind
Yeah.
of honorable mentions there. But the 80s to me, you kind of touched on this. I'm just gonna say John Hughes. Just
Okay.
kind of an overarching of Breakfast Club, Weird Science,
Mm-hmm.
uh, 16 Candles. He had a few more, but like to the point of like it's just the 80s. Like I mean, back when soundtracks had such an impact on movies, like that. Not that they don't have an impact on movies, they had an impact on culture. Like Don't You Forget About Me was like one of like a humongous hit in the 80s, and that came from the Breakfast Club. To the point of
Yeah.
Don't Forget About Me was a major plot point in Pitch Perfect. I mean, it was a humongous movie like 6, 7 years ago. They made a trilogy of those movies. Kevin Smith, it was a huge plot point in Dogma. I mean, like that's like a director from our time, and John Hughes was a huge influence on him. So I mean, that's a side point, but like he's like the '80s director. Like when I think of '80s directors, like John Hughes. So like I
Okay.
just had to throw that in there.
Yeah, I still need to see a few of those movies. Like, I think I've seen most of Ferris Bueller's Day Out. I've never seen Pretty in Pink or 16 Candles. Obviously, I've seen The Breakfast Club, so probably have a little catching up to do in that department. I saw his 90s movies for the most part, I think. I mean, Home Alone's a classic, and then he kind of started not doing as great a work after that, but
Well, he only directed 8 movies. Like I looked at it earlier today. Like he'd only directed like 8 movies. He's written like a gazillion movies, like all the Home Alones and that kind of stuff. But it was only like 8 movies that he actually had directed. But then he written and produced a gazillion.
all right. Very cool. All right, moving along with our show, let's get into our movie club pick of the week. And it is J. Edgar from 2011. This is a biopic about the career and personal life of the first director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, who served in that position for nearly 50 years. The film stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Armie Hammer, Naomi Watts, and Judi Dench, and lots and lots and lots of makeup. So, Joey, what led this film to end up on your movie club list?
Well, I love history. Like it was my favorite subject in school. I love Leo DiCaprio. He's a phenomenal actor who probably deserves to have more than the one Best Actor credit to his repertoire.
Yeah.
And it seemed really good. And then when I was looking through stuff and I saw Eastwood was the director, I was like, this is going to be a bang up movie. So that's why I put it on the list.
Okay. Definitely fell under the radar for me in terms of when it came out. I don't think I was watching as many movies then. But all right, let's get into it. So this was one of the more interesting movies that I had seen so far in our movie club, because it kind of started off and it felt, for me, I was not really digging it at all. It kind of felt like this like color by numbers biopic of this guy that I didn't really know much about to begin with, and the film wasn't really giving me anything to really go off of or really liking him. The cinematography was like super dark and kind of drab looking, which was kind of like, well, this isn't putting me in a very good mood. It's kind of strange. Like I saw Lincoln just a few weeks ago, and Lincoln had a similar kind of palette of being kind of gray and dark, but it really works in that movie for some reason so much more. Like the blacks like really kind of stand out. But yeah, in J. Edgar, it was shot in this similar, like, really dark style, and it just wasn't doing it for me. So we hear a lot of interesting things about Hoover along the way. Like, that's probably one of the most interesting things about the film. The fact that, like, he was involved with, like, this catalog system at, like, the Library of Congress that they mention. He, like, shaped the whole structure of what the FBI would come and the powers they would have of, like, judicial law. And also an early proponent of like fingerprints to track criminals. And so, going, like I had mentioned, like I just wasn't digging this film, and then kind of towards the end, it finally clicked to where I kind of was getting how this was kind of like a modern fable of how this guy presented himself. There's this great scene late in the movie where this guy's like, well, Edgar, I mean, you say you arrested this guy, but it wasn't really you. And you say you were here, but you really weren't. And so it kind of more or less paints this picture of how, like I had mentioned, this is like a modern fable of this guy who, like, is known for all this stuff, but, maybe he inserted himself a little bit more than, like, he was actually should have been. So I found that really interesting. But so many other flaws. So this one is pretty divisive for me. Well, what are some of your early thoughts on it?
Well, the movie literally started with a bang, which I was not expecting. It just started with an explosion, like right off the gun, and then well, I guess was supposed to grab your attention, and it kind of slowed down. I really liked it. At the beginning there was because it jumped back and forth. It jumped back and forth from the '60s because he was telling the story, he was telling the biopic, which kind of gave me made the reference. It's Interview with the Vampire, just without the vampire and Christian Slater and Brad Pitt. Um,
Yeah, I can see that.
but I like all of the history stuff. Um, all the back and forth where they're fighting the Bolsheviks and they're, fighting the commies, and then, then he's fighting the mobsters and, this, that, and the other, all of that stuff. That was really good. But then, like, it really bogged down when they got to the Lindbergh baby, and they spent a lot of time on that, which rightfully so. That was a big deal in American history. That was, Lindbergh was a world-renowned, world-famous superstar at that point. That would be like akin to basically when Michael Jordan's father was kidnapped, or like LeBron's kid getting kidnapped, or something of that. A big world superstar.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, and they spent a lot of time on that. But then the thing that irked me was they just skipped World War II. They skipped the 50s. There was nothing there. Like they also just kind of skipped. They mentioned the gangsters and that he fought Machine Gun Kelly and that he fought these other gangsters and
Mm-hmm.
they being the FBI, but it didn't really show how they did it not having guns. Up until they spent that time at the Lindbergh baby, and that's when they showed how they were able to get the gun, or sorry, that was where they were able to get chain of evidence, and they were able to get the Lindbergh law passed, and that's how kidnapping became a federal crime.
Right.
And that was, but it just, I don't know. The movie, it spent a lot of time wanting to show just how part of the movie's not enough time showing how authoritative and how feared J. Edgar was by doing this stuff, because I felt like they were trying to show he's doing this stuff from up top and people are looking down, and he has this power and he's authoritative. And then it spent a lot of time trying to show that he's this old man reflecting on his life and his revered work, and
Mm-hmm.
we should be sympathetic to him, like trying to bait emotions or bait an award maybe. And I feel like it had just went for the straight, this man is a feared badass, because he was feared by everybody because he had secrets and knowledge on everybody, which is why Nixon was like, yo, screw this guy, which they, what they showed at the end, with Watergate and all that. I just felt it was very disjointed. Like it was almost two different things that they tried to, it was the same character, two different ways that they tried to show together.
Right. I thought it was interesting how, like, I agree that they didn't show near the enough gangster stuff. Like, it was interesting how, like, they showed him, like, in, like, this public service announcement about, fighting against the public enemy. But then everyone's like, boo, boo, get off the screen. And then it went over to a movie about gangsters and everybody was cheering. So I thought that was an interesting, I want to get into the acting a little bit. I agree with a lot of those points, and I'll get back into it in just a minute. I thought DiCaprio's performance is fantastic, but the biggest drawback for me was this old person makeup. Like at times it looked okay, but it's almost like they came into it thinking like, oh wow, this makeup looks incredible. Let's just show this as much as possible. Where like if I was making a film like this, I would like not make that so obvious so it wasn't so noticeable, but it was like so in the forefront of everything they were doing. They would have these transitions to where him and his assistant director were walking around, and then all of a sudden they get out of an elevator and all of a sudden they're old, and it just brought so much attention to itself. And I mean, I guess they thought it looked good, but I thought it looked pretty horrid in most situations, and it really stood out like a sore thumb. I mean, he looked like a big sore thumb, to be honest. His acting, I thought it was good, but at the same time, I'm so unfamiliar with his character that a lot of times, towards the end of the movie, he kind of felt like he was Nixon, and then, in the middle of the movie, he kind of felt like he was Kennedy, and he just felt like this ambiguous figure that you could never really nail down and figure out exactly who he was. I don't think the movie was going for that. I just think it was just unevenness with, like you were saying, it was kind of messy with how much it jumps back and forth. I think that brings me to Judi Dench. I thought she was really out of place in this. it almost felt like she was in there just to make it more Oscar baity. I mean, she had that good scene where like she's like kind of shaming him and making it so he like wants to stay in the closet and not act like a sissy boy or whatever, like they would think about in those days. But I mean, I actually did watch this one interesting review where they actually kind of hinted that she might have been like his Lady Macbeth kind of figure, which is kind of an interesting thought. But for the most part, I just thought, I mean, I didn't see like this guy's mother. I just saw Judi Dench there being kind of like snarky, and so that didn't work for me as well.
Yeah, so Leo carried this movie. He put this movie on his back, like he probably had to go to the hospital, have some back surgery when this movie was finished. He carried this movie. Anybody else in this role, like the only other person that I could have seen from this time period, and shit, I forgot his name. He played Capote.
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah, he's probably the only other person that I could have seen probably like playing this role. So the makeup, like the first scene they showed him in the makeup, I literally like sat back and kind of cringed because it was so noticeable. Now maybe in 2011 that passed as good. I don't know. It was atrocious. There were a couple scenes where it didn't look as bad, but like it wasn't that it just made him look old. It was because they did. I don't know if it was just prosthetics too to make him look fat.
Yeah.
But it was
lumpy.
not. Yeah, it was not very good. But you know, Leo does what Leo does, and he carried the movie. Like he overshadowed everybody. I didn't even notice that his head secretary was Naomi Watts until the credits rolled.
Okay.
You know, yeah, and like not that she was bad. I just didn't even notice that it was her. And then you put the Lone Ranger and Armie Hammer as his the person, his love interest and his assistant director up against him. And we also did find is like the main other person with the name is Dame Judi Dench, and she's great, but like you said, you thought it was Judi Dench the whole time. I'm just like, I kept waiting for Daniel Craig to show the hell up, like
yeah,
like that's what I was waiting for. And I was just like, I just kept going, why is him being such a bitch to Leo? Like it just doesn't make any sense. And it was just
I think it did tackle the whole like I guess I'm like, you could probably go in a history book and really comb through and identify where they emphasize different points of history really well. And like, I don't know how obvious, like, so I guess it's known like his homosexuality, and they definitely that was a major emphasis in the film that was done well. And I guess that was one of the strengths of it, jumping like way in time, is like you see these guys in a relationship, and then it jumps in the future and it shows them how they've aged together, which was fine. I thought that was all done really well, but I don't know what else to say about it.
I have no problem with him showing any part of his homosexuality, because that's part of who he was. That's a well-known fact. But like, when I'm coming to watch a movie about J. Edgar Hoover, like, I want to see like all of this fear that he struck among politicians, among criminals, among like I want to see this big imposing figure, whether it's big literally or figuratively. Like I want to see the historical element, the fear and stuff that he struck in people, and maybe that was part of the problem, because I guess I was expecting to see something in the movie and I didn't see that to a certain degree, because he went in. And in some parts they did show it, because there were some scenes where he would come in and he would talk.
For instance, that hallway scene, like up at the beginning, whenever he's like choosing his men, and he like highlights that one guy is definitely not gonna stay on his force. That was definitely that imposing presence that you mentioned there, and hopefully I didn't seem like the homosexual elements like turned me off to the movie. I think that was done well, and definitely a point of emphasis that people would have been mad if it wasn't there. But yeah, I agree that maybe too much focus on the personal life, should have been more on like the historical relevance, even though it does touch on that, but maybe not, more of like things that happen instead of who the guy was.
I know. I think it's a hard place to balance because, like you said, if you leave it out, people are mad, and
Mm-hmm.
then if you focus on it, not enough people are mad, and if you focus on it too, it's kind of that hard way to balance. And the movie was already 2.5 hours.
Yeah,
Um,
it definitely. I remember it being like about an hour in, and I checked the runtime. Like, there's a whole nother hour of this. What else do they possibly have to say? And in that last hour, it went by pretty quick. But Judd, just to speak off of that point you just made, like Bohemian Rhapsody came out last year, and people just went on and on about how much they were upset about like the depiction of Freddie Mercury's homosexuality. So I feel like the wide range of like people watching these movies and like what how people are nowadays. I mean, no one's going to be happy with how these things are depicted. So you just got to do your best, and sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not for you.
Pretty much. I mean, yeah, it's just and yeah, this pretty much. There were like
It's
maybe
kind of hard for two straight guys to comment on what homosexual relationships in a movie, but just
I
got to
mean,
take
yeah,
it how we see it.
like I thought that I thought they did a good job of like showing like to the best of my understanding how that relationship would have been during those times. I mean, they even went away,
Yeah.
on a trip, and that's when they got in a fight, and because J. Edgar was going to get married, and he was like, hey, if you do this, you're never gonna see me again or talk to me again, and they punched each
Mm-hmm.
other, an actual fight, like in a relationship and such, and they did a good job of humanizing him that way instead of him just being this guy that talks his
Yeah.
way and orates, because that was one of the things they did well is he would go into like the talk to Congress, and he would orate very, very well,
Mm-hmm.
and say these long sentences with these long and big words and just great vocabulary, and he would
Mm-hmm.
enunciate very well. Until he was around girls, or until the one time he got
Yeah,
the one senator
absolutely.
kind of
With
till the one senator
how
pumped him out.
with how insecure he seemed in his personal life, and it being able to not show who that part of him was, but in his professional life being this total solid rock. And I really enjoyed the scenes of like it showed it a couple times where he was like sitting outside at, I guess it was the Oval Office, like getting ready to talk to the president. And I think they mentioned like he had served under like 8 U.S. presidents or something. So that whole routine that they looped in was enjoyed that part of it.
Yeah, and it's just the fact that the little tidbit that they shared at the end was like, even when he had died, some of most of his personal files, other than the few that were misfiled, were never found. Is crazy. The man was super paranoid, especially at the end. He had files on everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
so
they're
I
really,
mean,
and it paints him out to be like this definitely like a rule breaker, like willing to do anything it takes to like serve his agenda. And it was interesting how like towards the end, like they compare him against Nixon, and basically I kind of got the feeling that's like he might have been doing like all this kind of like rule breaking stuff all along, but he's no Nixon. So, and I'm a little ashamed to say this. The jumping back and forth in history kind of threw me off with how conniving he was, because there's this scene where he's like talking about like famous people, and this is like the setup to the Lindbergh baby thing. And there's instances in this movie where he was like talking about stuff, and it almost to me made it seem like he might have been like behind it in some way, which made in my mind made him see even more conniving. But watching it back, I mean, it really fell back into the whole like he's narrating like what's about to happen in his life. And so I guess to me as a general audience goer, me being confused by how it's being set up, like thinking he was more behind it, might be a flaw in the storytelling. I don't know. Did you ever get that instance? Like another moment was like the bomb in the beginning. Like it shows him like exiting this house and like leaving on a bicycle. And so for some reason in my mind, I thought he might have been like associated with the bombing. But I listened back to it, and he says like clearly like, oh, the Bolsheviks were behind this. Did you get any of that?
well, the scene at the beginning with the Bolsheviks is where he was talking about how there was no evidence, there was no chain of evidence, like the officers were trampling through everything, and he
Mm-hmm.
started picking up like the pamphlets, and then when they busted I guess it was a bomb making factory or something. They found a lot of the same things he had picked up at then, and that's how they tied the evidence together, and that's how we started
Mm-hmm.
using like for evidence and stuff. And then I never picked up on anything saying like to suggest that he did the Lindbergh case, but it was definitely more when he was older, like the conniving, where he like tried to connive um
Oh, like the
Martin Luther King,
Martin Luther King. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
where he tried to connive him out of accepting the the Nobel Peace Prize by
Right.
orating that that written letter in which his speech, and that was really good, but it was just because he had said something super negative, and he was like, oh well, he's a radical, and it's like, well, the stuff he is saying is radical, but it's not radical like the Bolsheviks or anything like that. And
Mm-hmm.
with how hard he went against the Bolsheviks and how hard he was going against Martin Luther, it's like where was his stuff against like the Nazis, or maybe he was with the Nazis, or he had sympathies to them and they didn't want to show that. But I was like, where was his stuff in World War II?
Yeah.
Where was all that stuff? And then he had that scene where clearly he had the recordings of
Kennedy
Kennedy
having an affair or something, right?
having an affair with the Russian spy.
Right.
Or the German spy, one of the two, I guess Russian, and talking to Robert Kennedy, and the Attorney General at the time, and then he's shot, and he just calls him and he's like, your brother's been shot, or the president's been shot, and he just drops the phone, and it's just this. But you see the human side of it, but he connived so much and did all this stuff, but if a president or someone did it, he was like, oh no, that's against the rules, but he would bend the rules to make someone else
Mm-hmm.
stay the rules. And I thought that was very interesting. He's like, oh, there's rules in place, you must follow these rules.
Mm-hmm.
But then he wouldn't do the rules. And it goes to show that while the president is limited to 2 terms, we got all these other people in Congress and the White House,
Yeah.
not the White House, but Washington rather, that have all this different kinds of power, because like
Mm-hmm.
he was
And court
outside.
justices.
Yeah, etc. He answered to the Attorney General and the Attorney General only, because they made sure to show that when he accepted the position, and he just did whatever the hell he wanted, whenever the hell he wanted to, basically, with no repute until Nixon, and then Nixon was like, "Yeah, I'm not playing ball with you," but that's because Nixon was crooked and knew that. Yeah, Nixon was crooked, and Nixon knew he was gonna bust him.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned the Bolsheviks, because, like, I think we've talked about it on the show before, a film flaw being to just talk about something and not actually show it. And that was definitely the case in that aspect. I mean, he does mention communism several times throughout, but you never really see any of that influence. I mean, obviously, like, if you think about it historically, like, I mean, the Vietnam War came a little bit later. But yeah, you really didn't. And I'm not sure if maybe that's smarter than what I think it is, and like them talking a lot about communism and not actually having as much of an effect as what they were hyping it up to be. I'm not sure if it was being clever there, or if really the film is just, really dropping the ball on the fact that they're not really showing what they're saying in terms of this communist threat.
I mean, yeah, they talked about him a lot, and they showed him busting, people who were Bolsheviks and stuff. Never really showed, because communism became a threat. World War II, and then, but when he was dying, that's when the Bolsheviks were there. They even said, that wasn't a home threat anymore. That was a global threat. There wasn't internal communist anymore. It was, external. It's Cold War, but still.
Yeah,
So
good points.
they did some stuff with this movie. They did some stuff that was okay, but like if Leo hadn't been the main person in this movie, like we probably I don't even know if we'd still be talking about this movie right now, because like I said, he carried this movie.
Yeah, I can definitely seeing it being even more forgettable if Leo's incredible performance wasn't there. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's a really good film, but it's flawed in a lot of ways. I mean, I definitely learned a lot about Hoover, and that's the ultimate point. And Leo's performance is great, but man, that aging makeup and the story structure is, I think it's really flawed. So I only went with 3.5 on this one.
That's the same thing I gave it was 3.5.
All right, now on to our challenge portion of the show. And last week, or last episode, I should say, Joey challenged me to watch Lady Snowblood, which is a huge influence on his favorite film, Kill Bill, directed by Quentin Tarantino. And so I checked out Lady Snowblood from the Criterion Collection. So based on your recommendation, I actually watched last night Lady Snowblood. I had a night full of vengeance with that movie and Kill Bill back to back. So these two are definitely fresh in my mind. I enjoyed Lady Snowblood. Let's see. So I really enjoyed like the action scenes in it, the violence, like all like the over the top, like cutting off limbs and blood spraying, like that. All that stuff is obviously great. I'll be interested to hear what you say because for some reason in the middle of this film, like I was a little lost in exactly like who was who and why things were happening. So I had a little bit of, there was like a slow portion in the middle of this film that I was a little lost, and then it kind of cranked up towards the end. I was listening to some analysis a little earlier today on this one, and they were noting the fact that in Quentin Tarantino's Kill Bill, like all the vengeance is very, what's the word? It's satisfying, where in Lady Snowblood it's unsatisfying, and they had pointed out the fact that like one of the people like she kills is like this degenerate gambler who has a prostitute daughter, and like she has sympathy for the daughter, and so like at the same time, like Lady Snowblood, like she's definitely out to kill, and she's gonna get that job done, and she's even mad when she can't get that job done, like in the scene where she's like facing off against this this grave of like this guy who she wanted to track down and kill, which I mean that gets a little bit more intricate with as the story goes along. So all right, some elements. So all like the flashbacks that showed like the artwork of different things happening, that was really cool, and you can obviously see that was might have been the influence for the anime sequence in Kill Bill. I was talking to you earlier today about a scene that really stood out to me in terms of how the movies were similar. And a line that really stood out to me was, so in the anime sequence, there's a part where the Lucy Liu character is on top of her, I think, father's killer. And she says, you know, do you see something in my face? And the Lady Snowblood has that same line when she kills that guy on the beach, I believe. And so I thought that was a cool similarity. And there's all kinds of visual similarities. I mean, obviously, you have like the guys, like the whole troop of people that vengeance is going to be sought on. Like you see an upwards view of all those characters in both films. So I'm really glad I checked this out. And like I had no idea it was that like similar. Like I kind of imagined like the part, like I'd seen Kill Bill before, and I knew like the part like in the snow at the end would probably definitely have some tie-ins. But yeah, it's like all throughout. Like I was surprised how like they have this whole sequence where like this old master is training Lady Snowblood, and she's like a little girl in this barrel, and he's like training her to have like these fast reflexes, and that's very similar to the goofy training character in Kill Bill Volume 2. But at this point, since I'm kind of coming into this very fresh, I'll let someone that might be a little bit more knowledgeable in all this have his take on these two films. Joey, take it away.
All right, so I got a good bit of stuff here for this. So the quote from the Origin of Oberyn, which is the anime sequence, is her quote is, "Look at me, Masamoto. Take a good look at my face. Look at my eyes. Look at my mouth. Do I look familiar? Do I look like somebody you murdered?" That is Oberyn as a child. That's her quote. The quote that Yuki uses in Lady Snowblood, and that is Lady Snowblood, that is Yuki, is, take a good look at my face. Doesn't it resemble that of the woman you tortured? But so when I watched Lady Snowblood last year for the first time, I watched it and then I watched Kill Bill. I didn't watch them back to back. I watched them back to back, and then I also watched Kill Bill and Kill Bill 2 last night. So I watched Kill Bill like 2 days apart from one another because one of my friends, she had never seen either movie, and so I just rewatched them really close to one another. So there are a ridiculous amount of similarities. So yes, like you said, there's the scene of the people who are getting the revenge, the revenge done to them. There's actually like a 15-second video I shared with you on YouTube that we can either put in the comment section or I can put in my review on Letterboxd, so you can kind of see that. But there's a lot. There's a lot of similarities in besides that. So Oren Ishii is definitely based off of Yuki, as is Beatrix Kiddo. They're both very much based off of Yuki, even to the point of, so Beatrix Kiddo, she gets pregnant and is beat the hell up, shot in the head, left for dead. Her baby is dead. She comes for revenge. Yuki's mother has her child killed, her husband killed. She goes for revenge, gets put in prison, and dies during labor having Yuki, and makes her an Asura demon and sets her on the path of revenge. So very similar, just changed up a little bit. And then of course Orin watches both of her parents be murdered and goes on revenge. So those two characters, they're the big end sequence for Kill Bill 1, set on a path together. And then you have Bonzo, who is the father that you were talking about, the drunk. He has his daughter, who she was prostituting to help pay for his medicine and his alcohol and what have you. So she, at the end of Lady Snowblood, after Yuki has her big fight and everything and has been shot and is walking away, she comes up and stabs Lady Snowblood. And this is all off of something that Quentin Tarantino said. Quentin Tarantino had said that there was going to be a sequel to Kill Bill that never came to fruition, which was going to be where we're going to talk. This comes back to Zatoichi. So in the first Kill Bill, when Beatrix kills Vernita Green, she kills Vernita Green, and Nikki, which is her daughter, comes in and she tells her, "Grow up, and you're still sore about it. I'll be here waiting." Then so she leaves her daughter there. So now you have two daughters in Bonzo's daughter and Vernita Green's daughter. They have seen their parent get revenged by the main character. So one obviously just runs up and stabs the other one. So the other one is a child. So you have Elle Driver in Kill Bill 2. She's never killed. And they confirm that at the end of Kill Bill 2. It shows everybody else's name crossed off, but it leaves her name with a question mark. And now that she is blind with no eyes, as Beatrix rips her eye out, very much like Paimei did, the idea was that she was going to be like a Zatoichi character, where she was a blind samurai, except for an evil blind samurai, and then kind of takes the Paimei role and trains Nikki to get her revenge. And so that was even going to parallel, she was going to take that role of Banzo's daughter, except for, instead of just stabbing her, it was going to be into another movie. So there were all sorts of parallels that were going to run into there. It was crazy, the level that he put into this and how much he was influenced by this movie, and then tons of other influences. Lone Wolf and Cub, like we talked about, as well. There was also the sound effects. Every time they would jump and that kind of stuff, they had the sound effects in both Lady Snowblood and in that scene where Beatrix is fighting Go-Go. There was the jumping sounds and then like the bowling sounds when they would knock the tables and stuff out. And then of course there's the other like crazy big one, which is the Flower of Carnage, Shura no Hana song, which was in both movies and was also sung sung by Mako Kaji, which is
Yeah,
Yuki.
yeah. I didn't realize Lady Snowblood was actually like a lot of these samurai movies I've watched have been a little bit earlier, so it was kind of neat to hear that funk element in Lady Snowblood. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, they use like that funk style music in a lot of kung fu movies. If they're not using like rap music, which I think is more in the more recent kung fu movies, but in the '70s they definitely use the funk music that they use there. But um, another big line was that Kill Bill. Beatrix says this three times that you and I have unfinished business. She says it to Bernita Green. She's a little bit more colorfully than that, and then of course she says it to Oren Ishii. And then at the end of Kill Bill 2, because of course obviously it was supposed to be one movie, it wasn't supposed to be two. She says it to Bill. Um, and at least one time in Lady Snowblood, Yuki says, "You and I have unfinished business." So
So
again,
the first time you saw Snowblood, did you have any trouble with following the plot at all? Am I?
I don't really remember ever having any trouble following the plot. I mean, I could have, but I don't remember it.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
It
you
just,
seem to know it pretty back and forth now, especially with being able to pick out just hyper details of each story. So definitely
I
you
mean,
know it.
I spent a lot of time today for this one. Right,
Okay,
I have I wrote all of this down. But
gotcha.
I don't remember being confused by the story, but I mean it's easy, I guess. Like if you look down to do something, or you had to pause it and start it back, or
Mm-hmm.
something of that nature, to have missed something. Um,
And I remember listening to this one analysis where like he was talking a lot about like facial gestures, and a lot of times it's hard to catch some of that stuff on a first watch when you got you're reading the subtitles, and you can easily miss elements like that. So I think overall, yeah, I really enjoyed the overall package of Snowblood with like the really cool violence and over the top stuff. The whole the whole disguise part towards the end, that was pretty cool. Yeah, definitely wouldn't have envisioned her like going to like this masquerade ball thing at the end. So what's your take? So I guess technically at the end of Snowblood she dies.
I mean, it definitely looks like she dies, and I did not watch Lady Snowblood 2. I had intended to, but I had friends come over and we watched some other stuff, some garbage instead. So I didn't get to watch that. So, but I mean, it definitely looks like she died. I mean, even to the point that, like in that 15-second video, it shows Oren. Oren's death sequence is very similar to the
Mm-hmm.
end of that movie. But I mean, like we talked, me and my roommate talked about, she's like a superhero. I mean, this is whatever. She died. No one cares. She came back to life. Screw it.
Okay.
I mean, I guess I don't know,
Okay.
um, but yeah, you're talking about facial stuff. So, um, in Kill Bill, they did this. They did it with Oren. They did it with Beatrix a bunch. Um, and I mean, I think they did it with some other people. They definitely did it with. Oh, they did it with Bill. They zoomed in on their eyes, just like where they framed just their eyes a whole bunch.
Mm-hmm.
And they did that also in that movie. Where they focused on their eyes a lot in Snowblood. Not as much, I guess. Like to where it was just on the eyes, but they would come up above like the nose. There was no mouth, but it wasn't just that frame.
Okay.
It was a little bit of stylistically different, but that was a thing like that I definitely noticed. I was like, oh, they're zooming in on their eyes, and then I watched Kill Bill, and I was like, oh my god, like I mean, I was into the joke of Kill Bill is the American remake, like he just I mean, it was just shots, music,
Mm-hmm.
lines. It was there's just so much influence. I mean, and there was so many other influences too. Like, I mean, Gone in 60 Seconds. Like, there was no car scene in there, but the
Mm-hmm.
scene where the sheriff's coming up and there's sunglasses littered like across the sheriff's thing. There, I forgot which one it is, but there's a western, and in Kill Bill 2, where Uma Thurman's standing up against the door of the church. It's straight out of this western. Like just so many influences, but like Snowblood is this like clear one. Even the house of green leaves, blue leaves, house of blue leaves. That scene at the end with all the snow and and the kimono and the sword fight. Like we just like obviously that was the first thing
Okay.
when you see it.
So, so like I said, I enjoyed it. And I was like towards the end of it, I was getting a little tired. It was getting a little late, and I was like, oh well, I'll try to watch as much of Kill Bill as I can. And it's been a while since I revisited Kill Bill, and wow, like my attention like snapped up into like high gear, and this was by far like the most fun I've ever had watching Kill Bill. Like all this, like this might be Tarantino's most stylistic film. I just want to gush about Kill Bill for a few minutes. Like, okay, so this soundtrack is like might be one of the best movie soundtracks of all time. There is so much great music in this. I mean the slow like guitar things during like the the title screens when she actually gets to Japan and you hear Flight of the Bumblebee and like the Something Against Humanity is the when the gang is walking out. There's just so much great music in that movie that gets you so pumped up. I've seen a few De Palma films in the last year or so since I've got more into the Criterion Collection, and I'm not sure how familiar with De Palma you are, but he loves to do these split screens to do his horror movies, and the whole like split screen whenever she's in the hospital and the nurse assassin is like coming after her is like straight out of a De Palma flick. And I was thinking, man, I wish Tarantino would directed a freaking horror movie, but this little segment here is the closest he's ever come to doing a horror movie with that suspense of her coming in and being like a killer in the night and taking her out, but no, Bill calls her up and says, no, we can't do that to her as much as she deserves it, or we deserve it back on us. So all that was really great. Just a blast. I mean, the crazy 88 fight at the end, like it just goes by so fast, and by the time you're done watching it, you're like, I just want to watch it again so I can pick up on even more of it. Wow. And at the end of it, I was like, man, I guess you could kind of consider Reservoir Dogs not as being that Tarantino flick that might end up being the Criterion one day, but I kind of wish it was Kill Bill just because of how stylistic it is, and the Criterion loves their Japanese influences, and I would love to see like a whole bloody affair Criterion disc one day. That'd be pretty awesome.
Oh my god, I would buy the living shit out of that in an instant. But I feel like with Miramax and whoever Miramax's rights and stuff, that would probably never happen. But oh my god, I would even wait for a sale. I'm not even gonna front. I would be like banging on the doors of Barnes and Noble, like, give me this.
Pre-order on Amazon, get a decent price that way.
I mean, that's true, but like I don't know, I'm weird. I'm like I like going to the stores. I mean, not that I don't buy. I buy plenty of stuff off of Amazon, and like I mentioned Zavi earlier, and I've got Shout Factory up there, and different stuff. But there's just something. I don't know. There's something about finding stuff off on shelves and stuff. We're in our 30s. It's part of how life used to be for us. It's different. For people then. But it's just like I found. I sent you a picture. I found the Red Shoes Criterion DVD for $1. I found it. It was at a pawn shop, but there's something about just looking through all the movies and the excitement of finding that one.
Yeah.
And pulling it off the shelf. So,
I definitely had that experience. I was at a used bookstore and I found the steel book for Django, and it was like definitely an older steel book, and it was in decent shape, and so that was a cool find. So I can definitely picking down what you're throwing down there, man. Yeah, I'll just close on the fact that Kill Bill is like, especially Volume 1. I really need to watch Volume 2 again. I'll probably do that in the next couple days just to kind of seal the story for me. But it's like a comic book come to life. It's just so visually, flashy and in the best ways for me. It's kind of funny. I mean, it's such a visually stunning film, but then when they actually do go to the anime sequences, it's so loose and sketchy and stuff. It still looks great. I mean, it's weird, like with the anime stuff of how I think it's kind of a tribute to that style of anime of it not looking exactly perfect, but it still works so great in the film.
Oh yeah, no, that animated scene was fantastic. Like I don't like a lot of anime, but that scene was fantastic. So the only thing we were talking about is like, you know, she gets revenge on Matsumoto, but it never shows her getting revenge on the long-haired guy, the guy who actually stabbed her father, and you know, is the badass who shoots the liquor and kicks the cigar and starts the fire. It's like where was his comeuppance?
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, but
Forgot about him.
yeah, like
That's in Kill Bill, right?
Yeah, in Kill Bill.
Okay.
So.
Any final thoughts on? I mean, you definitely nailed like the comparisons, but on their own, any final thoughts on each one?
All right. Well, I mean, obviously, we talked about it when we did the Tarantino. That, you know, Kill Bill is my favorite. It's not just my favorite Tarantino movie. It's my favorite movie. I mean, clearly, I think anybody who knows me knows that. So I mean, obviously, 5 stars still. For that, Lady Snowblood. I feel like if you like samurai style movies or revenge movies, its influence not only like extends there, it extends further. If anybody's familiar with Old Boy and its trilogy, even though it's not a real like trilogy and like 3 movies that stick to one thing, it also I saw when doing research for some of the stuff today, like there's a movie called Sympathy for Lady Vengeance, which is part of that trilogy, which is also heavily influenced. I have not seen it yet. Hopefully at the end of next month I will have seen it because I'm getting the Arrow release of Old Boy, which will have all 3 movies in it. But like it's one of those movies, you know, obviously it's not Casablanca, it's not Seven Samurai or anything like that, but it has influenced a lot of those stylized vengeance style movies. And if you like those style of movies and you haven't seen it, then definitely recommend picking it up. It is on Criterion, like we talked about, it and the sequel. And I definitely highly recommend watching it.
Right on. Well said. All right. So the next challenge, it's my turn to challenge you. And so I've always seen myself as a people pleaser. So it's been really getting at me the fact that every time I recommend a movie to you, you're not really seeing eye to eye with it. So maybe I'm picking something that's a little bit more, maybe possibly up your alley, and might mess up your plan for these sacred numbers of when you'll review stuff. But next time we are definitely going to talk about Kurosawa's Ran, his masterpiece, his colorful epic that it's just stunning, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts on it.
Oh no, that doesn't mess up anything. Like I've only seen 4 Kurosawas. I want to see more. I want to own. Right now, I don't own any. Despite the fact that like Hidden Fortress was my 1000. That was and I absolutely loved it. I loved it in Seven Samurai. I want to see more. So I'm about that. So I'm on board with that.
Awesome. All right, what's our next feature movie club film?
Well, especially now that you have picked that, I was looking through the movies and I saw one that really stuck out to me, but I kind of wanted to steer us away of us talking about a bunch of samurai movies or samurai style movies for a while, so I stuck away from that one. We'll come back to that one.
Okay.
We're gonna go with The White Ribbon.
Okay, a Haneke film. Have you seen any Haneke?
Not that I'm aware of, but we can click on this button and find out.
That button's not. They don't have a Letterboxd button for that, do they? Or are you just going to look through his?
Click on his. I mean, it'll say, it tells me I've watched 0 of 26.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, he's so he's like, I think he's an Austrian director, and he's really perverse. He does very stylistic films that really kind of try to get under your skin. So yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing another Haneke film. I've seen a couple, so yeah, I'm going into this one blind, so it'll be interesting to hear both of our thoughts on a perverse film like that.
Interesting. Awesome.
All right, thanks so much, everyone that follows the show. And if you want to join the club, make sure to hit subscribe and hit that bell notification. That'll alert you whenever our episodes go up live. And we'd love to hear feedback and questions from you guys. Any way you can give it to us, but what's that main way they can send us those questions, Joey?
That is going to be the Average Joe's Movie Clubcast at gmail.com.
All right, everyone. Happy movie watching. Skol.
All right, and before I sign off, I'm just going to say that hopefully the next time that you're looking for us on YouTube, we are hopefully going to have our long-awaited logo. It's from a close personal friend of mine. I'm just we'll shout him out again, but I'm going to go ahead and shout him out right now. You can basically find him on every form of social media under Zombie Ernie. So go look his stuff up. If you're in the southeast region of the United States, he pretty much does a lot of cons. You've probably seen some of his comic book stuff, so hopefully you'll see some of his stuff. But hopefully we'll have that, and you'll recognize this more than just as a thing of popcorn and a movie reel, and that'll be really cool. And I'm pretty excited for that.
Awesome. Look forward to it.
Yeah. Yes. And with that, thank you guys so much, and y'all have a good evening.